What is up, everybody? I am Get Flinged, and is the new 1.5x the new best sight for defenders? Is that a sight that you should be running by default on the defenders that have it? That's what we're going to be going over in today's video. We're going to be comparing the 1.5x with the other sights that are available to defenders. Keep in mind, as we're talking about this, I do realize that Rook still has access to the 2.0 and that the Boss G still has ACOG, but excluding those, the 1.5x is the sight that is available to the most defenders as far as zoomed optics. And excluding a few other cases, it's the only zoomed optic that's available to defenders. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at. We're going to be comparing the 1.5x to the other sights that are available to defenders, the non-zoomed sights. So that way you can see the pros and cons for each and what the sight picture looks like through the 1.5 compared to those other sights that are available to defenders. So with that said, let's go ahead and start comparing. And we're going to start with the T5. That is Legion's SMG. And you'll see right now the 1.5 compared to the Holo on the T5. And to me, the big thing that jumps out is just how much more of a casing there is on that Holo, how much more of the casing blocks your screen on the Holo compared to the 1.5. The 1.5 actually has a pretty good casing. There's a little bit that kind of is thicker on that right half of the circle there. But other than that, the casing of the 1.5 is actually pretty good, even compared to pretty much any other sight in the game for that matter. But it's tough to compare a zoomed scope to a non-zoomed because the field of view is going to be different. You know, obviously as we mess with the opacity here, you can tell that right away. But I think when you look at them over top of each other like this, you can see the visibility around the optic, meaning the amount of the screen that the casing is blocking is much smaller on the 1.5. Now that's not going to necessarily make a difference in every single situation, but I do think it's more desirable by default to have less casing blocking your screen than more. And I think that when you combine that with the fact that you get a little bit more zoom with that 1.5, I would say the 1.5 in this specific situation is a clear winner. By default, if you're on Legion, you should probably be running the 1.5. Again, every situation is going to be different. If you are somebody who plays extremely close quarters, then maybe the Holo is better for you. If there's something about that 1.5 you just don't like, then maybe the Holo would be better for you. But for the average player, by default, I would say on the T5, you should be running the 1.5. Now let's take a look at the 1.5 compared to the new red dot. And we're on mute now. The MP5K has both of these options. And as we look back and forth here, this case is a little bit closer in my opinion. The new red dot is really nice. It does have that big knob in the bottom right that blocks a lot of the screen. But when you compare the casing of this versus the 1.5, it's a much closer argument, I would say, compared to the Holo. One thing of note, you notice that the middle reticle dot is the exact same size on both. The difference is the 1.5 has that outer ring. You might not like that. That might be something that turns you off from the 1.5. Also, you'll notice on the 1.5 there, you can see that front iron sight on mute. Of note with this, they are in the process of making like a riser that will go under the sight so that you won't see that anymore. They already got it on, I believe, the 2.0. But they didn't have it finished for the 1.5. One of the developers that we had on the Logic Bomb podcast told us that in the last episode. So pretty soon, I'm hoping they will be introducing that into the game, and you won't have to worry about the front iron sights when you're using the 1.5 on some operators like Mute, Castle, and then Habana on attack is really bad as well. So keep that in mind. But again, comparing the two here, I think that it's much closer in my opinion. But when you take the fact that the 1.5 is going to give you some zoom compared to the red dot, I would probably gravitate towards the 1.5, but I think this is going to come down to personal choice a little bit more. Okay, now let's compare the 1.5 with the Vortex. Frost has both of these options available, so we'll be using her for this test. And I think the clear winner here is the 1.5. Again, with Frost, you can see a little bit of that iron sight in the bottom of the 1.5, but it's not that big of a deal in my opinion. I don't think this is as one-sided as the old Holo is with the 1.5, but I still think when you look at the two, that the 1.5 is preferable to me, especially when you look at the bottom of that Vortex and just how thick it is down there compared to the 1.5. I think that one thing to keep in mind is that with the 1.5 being thick on that right side of the circle, as you're strafing around a corner, depending if you're strafing right, that could block an enemy. So that's important to keep in mind that where the casing is thick on the 1.5 might affect your have real world consequences more than it being thick at the bottom. And that's something time will tell. But other than that, I mean, I'm just looking at this and I really gravitate towards the 1.5. Okay, finally here, we're going to be comparing the reflex with the 1.5. And I think that when it comes to the casing, I would actually give the edge to the reflex in this, as far as how much of the reflex blocks your screen. Now, obviously the 1.5 has the zoom. Now, me personally, I have never been able to train myself to aim at the top of the triangle on the reflex reticle. So the reflexes in me just don't get along, and it's my fault 100%. Like, I'm not blaming it on the sight. I'm not saying the sight is bad. I just always have trained myself to put that triangle of the reflex in the middle, and it'll throw you off if you're holding a really long like pixel and you're trying to aim at somebody's head. So me and the reflex don't get along. With that said, I think that when you compare the 1.5 casing with the reflex, I might even give the edge to the reflex. Obviously, the fact that you get a little bit of zoom out of the 1.5 is an advantage it's going to have over any of these sights. Like that's what that goes without being said. But as far as the sight picture goes, I might actually prefer the reflex compared to the 1.5. Okay, so that's really all the comparisons that I wanted to go over. You might be wondering why I didn't do the 1.5 versus the new Holo. And I think they're going to be doing some serious tweaking to it, at least the reticle. So I don't think it's fair to really compare it right now. I think most people agree that the reticle on the new Holo is a bit too thick. And I think that, they are going to be tweaking that. So I'll wait to do a comparison after they tweak it a little bit. With that said, I do think most people agree that the old Holo is better than the new Holo. And whenever I did the comparison with the 1.5 and the old Holo, I felt like the 1.5 was the clear winner there. So you can kind of get your comparison there. Now, I'll be the first to admit that comparing a zoomed scope to a non-zoomed scope is not comparing apples to apples, okay? But here's kind of the X factor I want to throw at you right now, okay? The fact that now you can change your sensitivity per zoomed scope, okay? So it is possible for you to set up your sensitivity and have it be exactly the same from Holo and all the other one-time scopes to the 1.5x to the ACOG. You can match up your sensitivity across the board. And to me, that really, you have to mention that in this comparison, because it used to be like, imagine if the 1.5 had a different sensitivity than the ACOG, and that had a different sensitivity than the 1x scopes. You might run into a situation where, just out of simplicity, you want to run 1x's because you're going to have the same sensitivity across the board on defense, and that could be desirable. But now with the ability to adjust your sensitivity, I really think that's an added benefit to the 1.5x. And maybe instead of saying it's an added benefit, the better way of saying that is that it doesn't have that downside that zoom scopes used to have. So I think that whenever I look at everything here as a whole, I think that for the average player, not knowing anything about their skill level, not knowing anything about their play style, that I would recommend that they run the 1.5x when they can. And that's the same advice that I've always really given for ACOG. And there are players out there who have, honed in their skill enough to know that sometimes it's better for them to not run ACOG. Especially, you'll see some attackers, not running ACOG. And I can't argue against that. And I understand exactly where they're coming from. And I've gotten that way in some situations. I'll run Holo a lot on like Amaru G8. But I think that for the average player out there, I've always recommend that you run ACOG by default and then tweak from there. And I think that I'm going to give that same advice with the 1.5x on defense right now. It's not a clear case, especially with that new red dot. That new red dot is really nice. But the best thing you can do, get in game, try it out, and see for yourself. Let me know if this helps you out, though. If you enjoyed this, please make sure that you like and subscribe, and I'll have more coming your way here soon.